Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder. Fidelity Investment Trust just filed their Form N-CSR, and I am digging into the investor relations side, specifically what they're telling us about their funds. Quick note, this is not financial advice, just my take on public filings for educational purposes. This filing gives us a snapshot of several of their funds as of the 30th of April 2026, and I am zeroing in on the financial details and what the investments actually look like. Alright, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what Fidelity is telling us about their registered management investment companies. The main event here is the release of their certified shareholder reports. First up, we have Fidelity Investment Trust itself. The parent company here, they've got an Investment Company Act file number of 811-04008. Their principal executive offices are located at 245 Summer Street, Boston, Massachusetts. The reporting period we're looking at is for the 6 months ended the 30th of April 2026. With the fiscal year ending on the 31st of October. This report covers a whole bunch of Fidelity funds, including things like the SAI Sustainable Emerging Markets Equity Fund and the Global Commodity Stock Fund, among others. It is basically a summary of how these funds have been doing. Let's start with Fidelity Global Commodity Stock Fund. For the period from the 1st of November 2025 to the 30th of April 2026, a hypothetical investment of $10,000 would have cost about $65 or 1.11% of the investment. The fund itself is quite substantial, with a size of $1,483,328,707. It holds 59 different investments and has a portfolio turnover rate of 65%. Diving into what the fund is actually invested in, the biggest slice of the pie, at 37.1% of net assets, is in oil, gas, and consumable fuels. That is a big indicator of where the fund sees value and risk. Following that, we have metals and mining at 29.9% and chemicals making up 15%. When we look at the asset allocation, it is pretty clear this fund is heavily invested in common stocks, making up 98% of its net assets. The remaining 2% is in short-term investments and net other assets or liabilities. Geographically, the fund is most heavily weighted in the United States at 54.2%. Canada follows with 18.2% and Australia with 8.5%. As for the top holdings, Exxon Mobil Corporation is leading the pack at 8.2% of the fund's net assets. Then we have Corteva Inc at 7.9% and Archer Daniels Midland Company at 5.6%. Next up, let's check out the Fidelity Sustainable International Equity Fund. For a hypothetical $10,000 investment, the costs over the last 6 months were about $67, or 1.30% of the investment. This fund is much smaller than the previous one, with a fund size of $25,966,127. It holds 86 different investments and has a portfolio turnover rate of 69%. Top market sectors here show financials leading at 28.3%, followed by industrials at 22.6% and information technology at 15.4%. This suggests a focus on more traditional sectors, but with a healthy dose of tech. Similar to the previous fund, this one is also heavily weighted in common stocks at 96.6%. Geographically, Japan is the top holding at 21.7%, followed by the United Kingdom at 13.7% and the Netherlands at 10.7%. It is interesting to see the diversification across developed international markets. In terms of top holdings, ASML Holding NV comes in at 4.8%, followed by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company Limited at 4.2%. AstraZeneca plc is also a significant holding at 3.6%. Now, let's look at the Fidelity Series International Value Fund. This one is a behemoth, with a fund size of $17,578,246,537. It holds 107 different investments and has a portfolio turnover of 49%. Sectors are interesting here too. Financials are dominant at 38.1%, which makes sense for an international value fund. Industrials and materials follow at 14.6% and 10.8% respectively. Asset allocation is pretty straightforward. 97.6% in common stocks and the rest in short-term investments and net other assets or liabilities. Geographically, Japan leads again at 20.6%, followed by the United Kingdom at 17.1% and the United States at 13.2%. This is a global diversification play aiming for value wherever it can be found. Top holdings include Banco Santander SA at 3.8%, Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group Inc. at 3.0% and Shell plc ADR at 2.9%. These are all established names, fitting with the value strategy. Moving on to the Fidelity Series International Growth Fund. This fund is also quite large, with a fund size of $17,617,957,974 and 107 holdings. Its portfolio turnover is 63%. Sector. Why is this fund leans heavily into industrials at 41.8% and information technology at 22.6%. This suggests a focus on growth potential where innovation and industrial advancement are key. Asset allocation is once again dominated by common stocks at 98.2%. Geographically, the United States is the largest exposure at 22.4%, followed by Japan at 13.6% and France at 12.3%. It is a mix of developed markets with a slight tilt towards the US. Top holdings include ASML Holding NV at 8.3% and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company Limited at 5.2%. These are giants in the semiconductor space, crucial for the growth narrative. Scroll Semi. Annual shareholder report as of the 30th of April 2026 9am. Next, Fidelity Series Emerging Markets Opportunities Fund. This is a huge fund with a size of $31,597,284,986 and a massive 247 holdings. Portfolio turnover is 56%. This fund is heavily skewed towards information technology at 37% and financials at 18.7%. This signals a strong bet on the growth engines of emerging economies, particularly in tech. Common stocks make up 96.4% of the portfolio. Geographically, Taiwan is the largest holding at 24.8%, followed closely by China at 23.2% and South Korea at 17.9%. This is a clear focus on the Asian emerging markets. The top holding here is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company Limited at a significant 17.6%, followed by Samsung Electronics Company Limited at 7.4%. These are massive tech players that dominate the global semiconductor landscape. Now, let's look at Fidelity SAI International Smart Completion Fund. This fund has a size of $1,915,144,626.43 holdings. Portfolio turnover is 50%. Sectors show industrials at 25.2%, information technology at 21.1%, and financials at 18%. A balanced approach across key sectors. Common stocks are the primary investment at 89.4%. Geographically, Japan is the largest holding at 28.1%, followed by South Korea at 12.2% and the United States at 9.5%. This fund diversifies across developed and emerging markets. Top holdings include SK Hynix Inc. at 7.5%, CaixaBank SE at 7.0%, and Renesas Electronics Corp at 6.2%. Let's move to Fidelity Sustainable International Equity Fund. This fund has a size of $25,966,127, holds 86 investments, and has a portfolio turnover of 69%. Notice this is the same fund size and holdings as the earlier Fidelity Advisor Sustainable International Equity Fund Class A, suggesting different share classes, targeting different investors. The sectors are identical to the class of shares we looked at earlier. Financials at 28.3%, industrials at 22.6%, and information technology at 15.4%. This indicates consistent investment strategy across classes where there are multiple classes. Again, a heavy reliance on common stocks at 96.6%. The geographic breakdown is also identical. Japan leads at 21.7%, followed by the United Kingdom at 13.7% and the Netherlands at 10.7%. Top holdings are also the same, ASML Holding NV at 4.8%, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co Ltd at 4.1%, and AstraZeneca plc at 3.5%. Now for Fidelity Advisor Sustainable International Equity Fund Class C. This fund also has the same $25,966,127 fund size and 86 holdings. The portfolio turnover is 69%. Here we see a cost difference. For a $10,000 investment, the costs are $106 or 2.05% of the investment. This is significantly higher than the Class A or I shares, indicating the impact of distribution and service fees common with Class C shares. The market sectors are the same though. Financials at 28.3%, industrials at 22.6%, and information technology at 15.4%. Common stocks are still the dominant asset class at 96.6%. Geographically, Japan remains the top region at 21.7%, followed by the UK and Netherlands. And the top holdings are also identical, ASML holding NV at 4.8%, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co Ltd at 4.2%, and AstraZeneca plc at 3.6%. This demonstrates how different share classes within the same fund can have varying cost structures, but mirror investment strategies. Next is Fidelity Sustainable Emerging Markets Equity Fund. This fund is quite small with a fund size of $33,108,664, holding 132 investments. Notably, the portfolio turnover is 145%, which is very high and suggests active trading within the fund. Sectors are led by information technology at 34.9%, fitting with the emerging markets growth theme. Financials are next at 18.3%. Common stocks make up 91.1%, but there is also 3.6% in international equity funds and 5.3% in short-term investments, and net other assets showing some diversification beyond direct stock holdings. Geographically, China is the largest exposure at 26.0%, followed by Taiwan at 23.8% and South Korea at 15.9%. This is a very strong concentration in those core Asian emerging markets. The top holding is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co Ltd at 14.3%, followed by Samsung Electronics Co Ltd at 6.8%. This highlights a significant focus on the semiconductor industry within emerging markets. Let's check out Fidelity Series Overseas Fund. This fund is large with a $17,590,233,963 fund size and 80 holdings. The portfolio turnover is 80%, indicating a moderately active management style. Sectors are led by industrials at 28.0%, financials at 23.3%, and information technology at 13.5%, a fairly balanced spread across major sectors. Almost entirely invested in common stocks at 99.0%. Geographically, Japan is the largest at 20.1%, followed by the United Kingdom at 16.3% and the United States at 13.8%. This shows a global diversification strategy with a significant presence in developed markets outside the US. Top holdings include ASML holding NV at 4.3%, Schneider Electric SE at 2.9%, and Banco Santander SE also at 2.9%, a mix of tech, industrials, and financials. Now, Fidelity Infrastructure Fund. This fund is relatively small with a fund size of $161,806,295 and 51 holdings. The portfolio turnover rate is 59%. As expected for an infrastructure fund, utilities dominate at 51.7%. Information technology and industrials also have significant weightings at 16.9% and 17.3% respectively. This tells us the fund sees tech and industrial companies as key enablers of infrastructure. It is heavily invested in common stocks at 96.1%. Geographically, the United States is overwhelmingly the largest holding at 82.1%. This makes sense for an infrastructure fund, as much of the readily investable infrastructure in mature markets is in the US. Top holdings are NRG Energy Inc. at 7.0%, Nevada Edia Corp. at 6.5%, and Nextra Energy Inc. at 5.5%. This mix of energy providers and a major tech player like Nvidia is quite revealing about the fund's approach to infrastructure investments. Let's look at Fidelity Advisor Sustainable Emerging Markets Equity Fund Class Z. This fund is small with a fund size of $33,108,664 containing 132 holdings. Its portfolio turnover rate is notably high at 145%, indicating very active trading. For a $10,000 investment, the costs here are $60 or 1.10%. This is on the higher side for an expense ratio, but not uncommon for actively managed emerging markets funds. The sectors are heavily weighted towards information technology at 34.9% and financials at 18.3%. This shows a significant focus on growth sectors within emerging markets. The asset allocation is 91.1% in common stocks, with 3.6% in international equity funds, and the rest in short-term investments. This suggests a diversified approach within equities. Geographically, it is heavily concentrated in China at 26.0%, Taiwan at 23.8%, and South Korea at 15.9%. This is a very strong bet on the Asian emerging market tech and financial sectors. The top holding is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co Ltd at a substantial 14.3%. This single holding represents a significant portion of the fund, highlighting a major conviction in that specific company and sector. Now, let's delve into the Fidelity Series Sustainable Emerging Markets Equity Fund. This fund has a size of $33,108,664 and 132 holdings. The portfolio turnover rate is very high at 145%. Suggesting active management and frequent trading to capture market opportunities. For a $10,000 investment, the costs are $82 or 1.50%. This is a higher expense ratio, likely due to the specific share class and active management. The sector breakdown is identical to the Class Z shares we just saw. Information technology at 34.9%, financials at 18.3%, and consumer discretionary at 10.4%. This confirms a consistent strategy prioritizing growth and financial sectors within emerging markets. Common stocks form the bulk of the investments at 91.1%. The geographic concentration is also the same. China leads at 26.0%, followed by Taiwan at 23.8% and South Korea at 15.9%. This fund is really focused on those key Asian emerging markets. And again, the top holding is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co. Ltd. at 14.3%. This fund, despite being a different share class, clearly follows the same investment thesis as the Class Z. Let's examine the Fidelity Series International Small Cap Fund. This fund is moderately sized at $3,215,599,940 with 202 holdings. The portfolio turnover is 42% moderate activity. For a $10,000 investment, the costs are minimal, just $0 or 0.01%. This suggests a very low-cost fund, potentially due to its series structure or internal management practices. The sectors are led by industrials at 34.6%, followed by information technology and consumer discretionary, both around 14%. This blend leans towards sectors that can benefit from global industrial growth and innovation, with a consumer angle too. Its asset allocation is heavily skewed towards common stocks at 97.2%, with a tiny sliver in preferred stocks. Geographically, Japan is the largest holding at 28.6%, followed by the United Kingdom at 16.9% and Sweden at 11.3%. This shows a significant focus on Northern European and developed Asian markets. Top holdings include Lagercrantz Group ABB shares at 3.3%, Adtech AB shares at 3.0%, and Games Workshop Group plc also at 3.0%. These are smaller specialized companies within their respective industries, which aligns with the small cap investment strategy. Finally, let's look at the Fidelity Advisor Global Commodity Stock Fund class. See, this fund has a size of $1,483,328,707.59 holdings. Portfolio turnover is 65%, indicating moderate trading. For a $10,000 investment, the costs are $108 or 1.86%. This is on the higher end, typical for Class C shares due to their distribution and service fees built in. These fees are meant to compensate brokers for selling the fund and providing ongoing service. The top industries are very telling: 37.1% in oil, gas and consumable fuels, 29.9% in metals and mining, and 15.0% in chemicals. This is clearly a fund riding the commodity cycle. Asset allocation is straightforward with 98.0% in common stocks. Geographically, the US is the largest holding at 54.2%, followed by Canada at 18.2% and Australia at 8.5%. This makes sense as those countries are rich in commodity resources. Top holdings include Exxon Mobil Corp at 8.2%, Corteva Inc at 7.9%, and Archer Daniels Midland Company at 5.6%. These are major players in the energy and agriculture sectors, aligning perfectly with the commodity focus. Now, let's zoom out and look at the overall Fidelity Investment Trust N-CSR filing. The core of this filing is the financial statements and highlights for several of their open-end management investment companies. It really is the meat and potatoes for understanding the fund's performance and composition. Each fund section provides a similar breakdown, key facts like fund size and number of holdings, sector and geographic diversification, and top holdings. Overall fund sizes vary dramatically from the massive Fidelity Series International Growth Fund at over $17 billion to smaller funds like the Fidelity SAI Sustainable International Equity Fund at around $25 million. This range reflects the diverse strategies and target markets Fidelity serves. The number of holdings also varies widely from just 43 in the Fidelity SAI International Smart Completion Fund to 247 in the Fidelity Series Emerging Markets Opportunities Fund. More holdings can suggest broader diversification or a strategy of tracking an index, while fewer might indicate a more concentrated. high conviction approach. Portfolio turnover rates range from a low of 22% for Fidelity Series Select International Small Cap Fund to a high of 145% for Fidelity Sustainable Emerging Markets Equity Fund. High turnover often means more active trading, which can lead to higher transaction costs and potentially tax implications for investors in taxable accounts. Across the board, common stocks are the dominant asset class, typically ranging from the high 80s to over 90%. This is standard for equity funds. You'll also see short-term investments and net other assets and liabilities making up the smaller portion. Scroll costs of a $10,000 investment EAM, the costs listed for a hypothetical $10,000 investment, are crucial. They range significantly from $0 for some series shares, indicating internal or fee-based access, to over $100 for advisor classes like Fidelity Advisor Sustainable Emerging Markets Equity Fund Class C at $123 or 2.25%. This highlights how important share class selection is for managing your overall investment costs. The key takeaway here is the sheer scale and diversity of Fidelity's offerings. You can see their consistent strategy of heavy common stock allocation, but the differences in sector and geographic focus really define each fund's investment objective. For instance, the infrastructure fund is heavily US. Based in utilities, while the emerging markets funds are laser focused on Asia. The commodity fund, as expected, is all about energy and metals. What struck me as particularly interesting is the contrast between the low costs of some series shares and the higher costs for advisor classes, underscoring the importance of understanding what you are buying into. That is my take. Stay decoded. If you want links to the broker and charting tools I use, they are in the description, affiliate links that support the channel.